Okay, so today's topic is constitutional compromises. So in class, you're going to need your Constitution, and we're going to be referencing a lot of places in the Constitution in order to see where the compromises are written. So to make sure you can find places easily, you need to be familiar with the format. The Constitution, the very first paragraph of the Constitution is the preamble. Okay? It doesn't actually say the word preamble, but it starts "We the People." That should sound familiar. And then after that, you have a series of articles, Articles 1 through 7. And when we write down the articles, you do Roman numerals. So Article 1, Roman numeral I, and so forth. And then the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments after that, and there are 17 other amendments in addition to that. So when you want to write a place quickly, you shouldn't refer to the page number because there's multiple formats and versions of this document. So you should be able to refer to it by its article, its section, and its clause. So as I'm going through this, if you look through, you'll notice that there are section numbers, and then within each section there might be some paragraphs. So what we do is we use a Roman numeral for the article, then you put a comma, and the number for the section, and then a period, and the number of the clause or paragraph if you're trying to get more specific. So to practice, Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 5. Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 5. Flip to that section in your Constitution. Pause this right now while you find it. Okay, and if you found it, it is the power to coin money, that Congress has the power to coin money. So you're expected to be able to find a place quickly if I have you go to a section. And also this helps you in your note-taking to write things more efficiently. Okay, let's get to the actual meat of this. Constitutional compromises. So the Constitution itself is a compromise. It's a compromise between a few different groups, and that's what we're going to go through. Delegates were sent to Philadelphia. Initially, the plan was to revise, make some changes to the Articles of Confederation, which proved to be quite difficult because changes to the articles required a unanimous consent from the state legislatures. So the delegates quickly realized that what they actually needed was a whole new government. And so they would discard the Articles of Confederation and set up a new government with a new constitution. They had to make some agreements before the agreement. So they agreed that they would only need 9 of the states to agree for the Constitution to be ratified. So they immediately said, the unanimous vote is too difficult to get for the articles, and we don't need unanimous consent here. So they agreed that 9 out of 13 was a sufficient supermajority to set up this new constitution. They also agreed to total secrecy in Philadelphia. And thinking about the men that were there, the founding fathers, also called the framers, they framed the Constitution. They're an elite group. They're educated, highly educated, typically from urban port cities, and they were radical. But I want to underline that they are an elite group. So while they might be talking and thinking about the common man, they themselves weren't necessarily the common man. Okay, so the organization of this lecture, I'm going to go through 3 sets of compromises. So essentially 6 groups making 3 compromises. For each one of those compromises, there will be a slide on the debate that was had between 2 groups. Then there will be a slide on the compromises that we can actually find in the Constitution that were agreed upon, and then the implications of the compromises for the United States. So let's start with large versus small states. This one you're probably already familiar with. It has to do with developing a system for fair and equal representation. You could assume that the large states, meaning the populous states, they would want power in Congress based on their population. There's a logic to that. They have more citizens that would be affected by federal law, so they want to have more votes in Congress to pass federal law. And small states would say they too fought in the Revolutionary War. A state is a state. They should have equal power in Congress. So the issue is really over representation and taxation, and that representation is power. It's, the more people you have in Congress, the more votes you have, the bigger effect you have on the passage of legislation and policy as a whole. So less populous states would have wanted states equally represented in the legislative branch, and the more populous states would have wanted representation based on population. Probably from APUSH, this discussion, this debate sounds familiar. The New Jersey and Virginia plans were presented, but ultimately at the convention, the compromise came to be known as the Connecticut Compromise. It's based off the Connecticut Plan. It's also called the Great Compromise. This compromise says, let's give large states what they want, and let's give small states what they want. They can each have a chamber or house in our legislative branch called Congress. So this is called a bicameral legislature. The House of Representatives would be the representative body that has members based on population. So the bigger the state, the more people in that state, the more representatives that state gets in the House of Representatives. Whereas the Senate would appease the small states because it allowed for each state to send 2 senators, and each senator has a vote. So in the Senate, Rhode Island is just as equal to California or Texas. An additional perk to this arrangement would be that you have 2 chambers. And if you have 2 chambers, that means it'll be a little bit more difficult for legislation to pass, but that could be healthy. That could be part of our healthy checks and balances. In this case, we would describe it as intra-branch, meaning it's within a branch. We tend to think of checks and balances between the 3 branches, but in this case, a bill could pass the House, but stall out and ultimately not pass through the Senate, and vice versa. So it's additional checks and balances. Okay, so those were the debates, that's the compromise, but let's actually look in the Constitution now. So let's open up to Article 1. It's the first article, it's the longest article in the Constitution. So flip to Article 1, and if you'll read Section 1, it says, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. So that here tells you that the entire article, Article 1, is going to be about the legislative branch. So I would write legislative branch next to Article 1. So in the future, when you have a question about the legislative branch, you should know Article 1. What it doesn't say here is that word bicameral. But this section, Section 1, describes a bicameral legislature, a legislature with 2 chambers. So somewhere next to that, you should write in the word bicameral. That's the vocabulary word for a legislative branch with 2 parts. We generally refer to the Senate as the upper chamber and the House as the lower chamber. So upper house or upper chamber is the Senate, lower house or lower chamber is the Senate. And one other thing of confusion about house, they are both houses. So the Senate is a house in Congress. It's one of the 2 houses. And the House, of course, is a house. So if we're talking about the House or the Senate, it'd be lowercase. So 2 houses, lowercase h. But when we're talking about the House with a capital H, then we're talking about the House of Representatives. So you'll often hear people talk about the House on the radio or in the news. The House, capital H, is just a shorter way of saying the House of Representatives. All right, now looking at the second section, the first part of it, and the first part of the third section. We are looking at these so you can see the format. Section 2, paragraph 1, starts with the House of Representatives. And then if you flip over to Section 3, it starts the Senate. So underline the House of Representatives in Section 2, and underline the Senate in Section 3. This is a very logical document. Things go in an order, so it won't feel like you're memorizing it because it itself is logical. So the first section of Article 1 says there's a bicameral legislature. Section 2 is going to be about the House. Section 3 is going to be about the Senate. All right, so that is our bicameral legislature. Down the road, when we learn about the 2 chambers, we're going to see that they are very distinct. They have distinct features, distinct powers, and ultimately a distinct character. So the two chambers, we're going to see more specific differences between the two later, but at this point we can see that there's two different chambers fairly and equally representing the people. So the implications of this compromise, that there is plenty of debate, plenty of deliberation, and our legislative body hopefully does not make radical sweeping changes, but rather puts plenty of thought and care into the legislation it passes. The negative side of that is gridlock, that our checks and balances are so effective it is very difficult to get legislation passed. So when you see this word gridlock, we're talking about traffic, that there's some sort of blockage in Congress. And we see that today. That's what most Americans' frustration is with Congress, that not enough gets done, that they're too slow and not responsive enough to the citizenry and not responsive enough to our problems. Okay. We're going to stop here, and in the next video, I'll pick up on the second compromise.